All right, now let's get to what the article I sent you last week. We'll close with your thoughts on this. This is a very interesting story that ran in the New York Times, and the headline is "Musk and the Right Co-opt the Left's Critique of U.S. Power." And the subhead is "Suspicion about covert operations and soft power used to be mostly the purview of the left, no more." And here is the lead. Here we go. In his podcast studio, Joe Rogan sat for 3 hours, cigar smoldering, brow furrowed, as his guest held forth about the dark history of American influence abroad. The highlights were familiar to any left-wing critic of American power. The U.S. Agency for International Development's involvement in the South Asian heroin trade in the 70s, the Central Intelligence Agency's infiltration of the American left, rogue U.S. aid operations in Cuba, and the windfalls American oil companies have reaped from U.S. regime change efforts. But Mr. Rogan's guest on the February 12th episode of his podcast was not a Marxist professor or a muckraking intercept writer or Miles Kampf-Lassin. He was a former, I just added that Miles Kampf-Lassin. He was a former speechwriter in Trump's first administration named Mike Pence, whose work has been cited regularly by Elon Musk as justification for shutting down USAID, the 64-year-old foreign aid agency. Wow. I'm like, the MAGA movement is fighting the ghost of Ronald Reagan, Mr. Ben said. Miles, I've been seeing this, okay, because I follow Rogan. So I watch Rogan, like, pick and choose from lefty critiques and use them to justify everything that the leftists were against. But this one is like, I've been watching this one for a while. So citing all the abuses of American might and power that have gone down throughout my lifetime, and to a lesser degree, your lifetime, although your lifetime as well, because you lived through the 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And none of these guys were ever anywhere near a front line to oppose it in real time. And I'm watching, like, pick and choose lessons they want to use to justify any attempt whatsoever into promoting a different kind of foreign policy. Miles, it's political jujitsu, in my mind, of the highest form. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on this trend. So go ahead.
The New York Times might say that these are not the bastion of the left anymore, but whoever that reporter is clearly not spending time in contemporary circles of socialists or Marxist or critics of American power, because those critiques definitely still remain. And the reason is because I think the reason that historically the American left has been so focused on and so prescient about calling out and exposing this type of government overreach and, in many ways, manipulation of geopolitical dynamics, is because it has been trained directly on the left, both internationally and domestically, right? These are, when we talk about, if you want to talk about, like, the CIA overthrowing the democratically elected government of Chile and installing a dictator in Pinochet, for example, something, you might hear now one of these right MAGA guys complain about, well, why were they doing that? Why were they putting the Chicago boys, the free market fundamentalists from the Chicago school, the Milton Friedmanites, down there? It was to destroy the left, to disrupt and nullify a democratically elected democratic socialist government of Allende. That's a prime example of, like, how this type of foreign policy has been carried out. It's not just because it was trying to go after the far right, which is how they're trying to claim now that somehow American soft power is being used to curtail the ability of far right autocrats or something. No, it's about the class interests. Again, this is how American foreign policy and domestic policy has been weaponized. It's especially in the period after World War II. Throughout the Cold War, it was used to fight the communists, the communist threat. This was the express purpose of this deep state. And that continues to be the case. It's not like there was some turn when the leftists got power of the levers, the CIA or these three-letter agencies. No, that continues to be how, and when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to COINTELPRO, when it comes to all these various ways that the government is using its power, and U.S. aid, leftists have been critiquing the way that U.S. aid has been an instrument of America spreading American soft power for decades, and that criticism remains true, right? That when you see these programs being invested to promote liberal democracy or whatever in countries abroad, especially those that have more left-wing governments, they are often, this is a cover for pushing American interests, and those interests are aligned with our corporations' interests, right? For the interests of transnational corporations, in order to open up free markets, in order to privatize systems, so that you take away public sovereignty, and especially the ability for people in other countries to have democratic say over what they're, it's a fundamental kind of hypocrisy of calling these programs for liberal democracy when in fact they are for privatization and free market interests. And yet the US aid also does do kind of programs to support public health abroad, right? There's plenty of programs to fight the spread of AIDS and other diseases across the globe. And a lot of the very programs that Musk and Doge immediately cut when it came to US aid were ones that were implemented under the Reagan administration, right? So these were not the bastion of the far left by any means. The left's critique of how American power has been used to protect the right of capital to have free flow and no borders, and to accumulate power and wealth with no bounds, those all still remain. And when they call that out, that's when leftists come under threat from these very programs. It's becoming like somehow chic on the right to now bring in these critiques as if they were ever the subject of them. But no, these programs exist to protect the power of people like Musk and Trump speechwriters and whatever, right? So it's a pretty, I would say, like, insincere, this sudden interest in it. And if they actually did care about it, I think that you'd see a lot more effort working to dismantle the mechanisms that create the ability for this deep state, as they call it, to go after the left. Because if you look at its history and its present, that certainly is the entire project of this form of deep government.
Yeah, man, that's a good riff. It's when you were on it, I wrote it down. MAGA hates lefties, but they love lefty critiques, and they're useful. Let's put it that way. They're useful at times, and
they're salient because they're right. They are correct.
Right as in correct.
Yeah.
Right as in correct. And I got to tell you, Joe Rogan's the master of this, Miles. And so he had on Blago. I don't know if you saw it. I'm sure you didn't. I don't blame you for not. About a month or so ago. And so Blago was talking about, how the deep state brought him down. Blago, Rod Blagojevich, former governor of Illinois, if anybody doesn't know who he is. And I listened in for a good chunk of it, and I kind of got a kick out of it because, again, talking about, if you're talking about like the people who have been hit the hardest and most victimized by the quote unquote deep state surveillance and intimidating tactics, it's definitely not mainstream Democratic politicians, which Blago was about his, he was flamboyant, but he was just like, he was your basic centrist. He got picked on because his father-in-law, Richard Mell, blabbed to, I forget where it was, that it's about his son-in-law's corrupt administration, which brought the feds in on him. And so you could argue, Miles, that the feds are wasting their time. Like, you could make an argument investigating big city Democratic mayors or politicians And you can make that argument. I would not make that argument. I don't know if you would make that argument. But the notion that somehow or other they were picking on him because of his ideology is preposterous. And yet, that's the justification that MAGA uses to like assail, to put Kash Patel in as the head of the FBI, to defend Donald Trump for all his grifts, and I'm watching it. And it's just, like I said, it's just, it's done without any sense of irony. You know what I mean, Miles? It's done without any sense of self-reflection.
Yeah. And one, back to your previous point too, about actual explicit American foreign policy and the role of these people. Donald Trump supported the invasion of Iraq. Pete Hegseth, his defense secretary guy, who's says he's in line with all these upstart MAGA types, he was defending the Iraq invasion and our entire policy in Iraq up until like pretty recently. So this is not as if this is a new class of like right-wing foreign policy thinkers who shared the left's critiques or the left's views. The progressive movement, the anti-war movement, the left-wing movement in this country was correct when it came to the stance, the moral stance on opposing the invasion of Iraq and imposing the occupation of Iraq when it came, to the entire Bush administration's foreign policy. It's also correct when it opposed the drone war that was, started up by Obama and has now been carried on under Trump and Biden. We might see down the road the right wing come out against drone warfare in the future and claim it as their own, but that is not the same as taking a principled stand like those of us who have fought against these foreign policy blunders have. So I think just check the receipts when it comes to these people.
Check the receipts. And the guy I think about whenever I watch the right sort of engage in this kind of discourse is Pat Tillman, who was an NFL football player and gave up his career to enlist. I think he was in the Army Rangers after 9/11. And then, I mean, he didn't really fully articulate exactly. So it's hard. There's a lot of speculation, but he was clearly undergoing a transformation of sorts as he came to realization that his patriotism had somehow or other been exploited and used. So he was killed, friendly fire, and which is such a bizarre term. Anyway, he was killed, so he never got a chance to fully explain where he was and how he viewed the world. But when I hear Joe Rogan sort of entertain these notions, I think of Tillman, who I think is more legitimate in terms of like a self-reflection of like where I was politically, where I am now. You follow me? As opposed to just manipulating stuff that lefties like you have been saying, or no, beyond me or Noam Chomsky, who is sort of, the great thinker on many of these issues. And so it's a form of exploitation, if you will, and manipulation. I don't know how healthy it is, Miles. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right to point to Chomsky as somebody who's been a virulent critic of American empire and of the ways that our the foreign policy establishment, whether it's neoconservative or neoliberal, has worked to promote American interests, which, as I said, are always in the contemporary moment we are in are also reflective of corporate interests and of those of the most powerful and wealthy people on the planet. Those are also will use and exploit the very people at the lowest rung in the economic ladder at every point. And if you looked at, we don't have a draft right now, but if you look at how recruitment is done into the military and what kind of communities are preyed upon in order to enlist, that we're living through a period where a lot of the people that are facing the brunt of foreign wars are the people who can, who don't have many other options. And that is reflective, I think, of the state of how our military industrial complex operates and who it turns to in order to be on the front lines. And it's important to both look at that angle of how modern warfare operates, but also who is benefiting from it, not just who's benefiting in a geopolitical sense, but who's actively profiting off of it. And it's always going to be defense contractors. I mean, I've talked about this on the show before, but this is the thing that America exports now. We used to be a country like exporting, vehicles across the globe and different types of products. Now it's entertainment and Hollywood and music, cultural production that spreads worldwide, and it's bombs. We have defense contractors that provide offensive weapons across the globe. And if you look at any of these, the kind of massive military giveaways, and you look at the Pentagon budget, when are we going to start slashing the money we're investing in, Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin in building these, F-52 bombers and stuff? These are massive parts of the federal budget, but we don't see DOGE going after those, because this is where America gets its bread is buttered, because this is where the economic power and the military power kind of come together. But again, the people that are benefiting from that are those in positions of wealth and power and esteem. It's not everyday working Americans. So again, it's kind of a scam to enrich certain people at the expense of others. And when it comes to questions of war and foreign policy, the stakes of it are incredibly high.
Yeah, I haven't seen DOGE go after them. Is a good line. They've talked a little bit, Miles, about how they're finally going to turn their attention on the Defense Department. I always laugh when they say
they
that.
talk about the Pentagon, but then they said they're just going to replace that money. They're like, we're going to cut $100 million, but then they're going to we're going to reinvest into this other stuff. It's like, wait, well, that's not really cutting. Then you're just moving the money.
I know. Oh my God! On one level, you have to laugh because they are such obvious scam artists. On the other hand, it's sad because it seems to be working on some level, to put it mildly. All right, Miles, I'm going to let you go, and I appreciate it. Miles Kampf-Lassin, in these times, editor, writer, and dear friend of the show. So, Miles, thank you very much. Appreciate it as always, and talk to you soon. I also want to thank producer Chris. He does an outstanding job, and I know Miles and Joe Rogan agree with me when I say, hey, producer Chris, give yourself a raise, take it out of petty cash. Peace and love, everybody.